What if in this vast expanse of human endeavor, the most curious irony is that the very faculties that distinguish us, our intellect, our capacity to question, to reflect, to wonder, are slowly being bartered away for the brief comfort of amusement? There is something profoundly unsettling in watching the architecture of society bend itself to reward not wisdom, but spectacle. You can sense it in the glowing rectangles we cradle in our palms, in the hollow applause echoing beneath viral videos, in the collective sigh of a culture content to float on surfaces too thin to ever bear the weight of a real thought. For it is easier, so much easier, to slip into the soft anesthesia of distraction than to confront the inconvenient demands of an examined life. Every day we wander through a carnival of trivialities, guided by invisible currents that know our impulses better than we do. A world that once prized the labor of understanding now prefers the instant currency of reaction. To think slowly, deliberately, to hold competing ideas without immediately crushing them beneath the hammer of certainty. Such pursuits have become as antiquated as candlelight. Once, public discourse was a dance of rigorous minds, a careful unraveling of complex tapestries. Now it is a chorus of slogans that crowd out all nuance. And in this clamor, you begin to see how ignorance doesn't merely emerge by accident. It is manufactured, refined, polished until it gleams. There is an exquisite cruelty in this design. When a culture starts to exalt the shallow, it is not simply that the trivial becomes popular. It is that the thoughtful are exiled. Those who would invite you to sit with discomfort, to doubt, to consider the possibility that truth resists brevity. These voices become unwelcome intruders in a room enthralled by performance. The algorithm has no patience for the slow bloom of insight. It craves immediacy, a flicker of outrage, a pang of envy, anything that compels you to keep scrolling. For in this economy, attention is not a means to understanding. It is the end itself. And so we learn to trade our curiosity for quick relief. But beneath the casual spectacle lies something more somber, a recognition that the human spirit, once tethered to wonder, is being coaxed into a narrower existence. Each shortcut we embrace, each morsel of pre-digested thought we consume, shapes the contours of our perception. A society that rewards the performance of ignorance cannot help but train its people to see depth as a liability. It is not difficult to see how a generation raised in this climate would come to believe that cleverness is pretension, seriousness is arrogance, and complexity is nothing but a ruse. Observe how easily the counterfeit becomes the norm. Politicians no longer require command of policy. They need only the right cadence of outrage. Influencers do not need mastery of any craft. They simply learn to mimic authenticity well enough to fill the silence with spectacle. The news, once tasked with informing, becomes an assembly line of provocation. And in each corner of this machine, the same dark lesson is whispered. Sincerity is a weakness, and understanding is a burden you are better off discarding. Yet perhaps the most tragic dimension of this shift is not how it distorts our institutions, but how it unravels our interior lives. For in the quiet hours, when the screens are momentarily stilled, there is often an ache, a sense that something essential has been forfeited. We are creatures made to wrestle with mystery, to inhabit questions that do not yield to easy answers. And when we sever ourselves from that birthright, the soul begins to thin, like a body denied nourishment. This is why the shallowness is so seductive. It spares us the vulnerability of admitting we do not know. It delivers the narcotic of certainty, requiring nothing but our passivity in return. A joke is safer than an argument. A meme is easier than a meditation. The momentary dopamine rush feels preferable to the slow, sometimes painful process of evolving. Our minds, shaped by biology to prefer simplicity, find themselves addicted to the smooth sweetness of unchallenging content. In a universe brimming with complexities we will never fully grasp, the temptation to pretend otherwise can be irresistible. to believe that what is easiest to digest must be what is truest, to confuse familiarity with wisdom, repetition with proof. And so the endless scroll becomes more than a habit. It becomes a way of seeing, of reducing the infinite intricacies of the human condition to a carousel of amusements. But the damage is cumulative. Every hour spent feasting on the trivial erodes our capacity to reckon with the significant. When your attention is trained to leap like a startled animal from stimulus to stimulus, it loses the discipline required to contemplate anything slowly. The mind, like any muscle, atrophies when deprived of exertion. And so the crisis deepens, not merely a crisis of information, but a crisis of meaning itself. We watch as education systems are hollowed out, their purpose narrowed to the crude calculus of market utility. Humanities are discarded as relics, philosophy, history, ethics reduced to ornamental curiosities with no place in a world too impatient to look backward, too distracted to look inward. And we forget that it was precisely these disciplines that once offered ballast against the tides of ignorance. That taught us to question our impulses, to examine our convictions, to resist the seductions of certainty. Meanwhile, the marketplace grows ever more adept at extracting profit from our weaknesses. Every ping and notification is a tiny siren song, luring us deeper into a labyrinth of distraction. The algorithm does not care if you learn, only that you return. It does not reward the quiet triumph of understanding, only the measurable proof of engagement. In such a system, wisdom becomes not only unprofitable, but invisible. And so the superficial thrives, the spectacle metastasizes. The loudest voices claim the stage, not because they have something urgent to teach, but because they have mastered the choreography of attention. In this theater, the distinction between true and false, important and trivial, becomes impossibly blurred. All that matters is whether you are watching, whether you are reacting, whether you are feeding the machine. Yet somewhere amid this bleak panorama, you may sense the stirrings of something stubborn and unkillable, a hunger that no algorithm can fully extinguish, the desire to matter, to belong to something more consequential than a marketplace of illusions. And though the culture will try to convince you that this desire is impractical, outdated, even naive, it remains a testament to the part of us that has not surrendered. For even as millions drift deeper into the narcotic haze of distraction, there are those who are beginning to wake, who sense that the cost of this shallow existence is far too dear, that the real wealth of being human lies not in the accumulation of attention, but in the pursuit of understanding. You will find them in quiet corners, reading long-forgotten books, writing by hand in journals that will never be shared, choosing presence over performance. They are the ones who suspect that life's meaning cannot be compressed into sound bites, that to love, to suffer, to create, to know, these things are too expansive to be flattened into spectacle. They understand that a life lived entirely at the surface is not only impoverished, but ultimately unendurable. Because when all is reduced to performance, nothing remains to sustain the soul. And so, a countercurrent forms, not as a mass movement, but as a quiet rebellion of individuals who refuse to become caricatures of themselves, who do not measure their worth by the number of strangers who approve of their persona, who dare to be serious in a culture that confuses seriousness with arrogance, who protect their attention as a sacred resource, not to be squandered on the trivial. If you look closely, you will see these people in unexpected places. They are the ones willing to risk the discomfort of admitting they do not know, the ones who prize the long conversation over the viral clip, the ones who choose the patient unfolding of understanding over the instant gratification of the scroll. In this era, choosing depth is an act of quiet defiance. It requires you to disappoint the expectations of a world that wants you compliant, reactive, easily entertained. It requires you to bear the loneliness of being misunderstood, to endure the suspicion that perhaps you are missing out on something important. But there is no more radical act than refusing to surrender your mind. Because in the end, every civilization is measured not by its distractions, but by its capacity for reflection. Not by the noise it produces, but by the wisdom it preserves. If we allow ourselves to be governed by algorithms that reward our worst instincts, we will not merely become less informed, we will become less human. And so each of us must decide whether we will remain content to float on the surface or whether we will risk diving into the deeper waters where meaning waits. It will not be easy. It will never be popular. But it is the only place where something enduring can be found. The only place where the self, unmediated and unperformed, can finally be met. And if you have ever felt the quiet ache that perhaps you were made for more than consumption, if you have ever suspected that your life is meant to be an inquiry rather than a performance, then trust that suspicion. Honor it, because it is nothing less than the oldest, most essential truth, reminding you that your humanity cannot be measured by your capacity for distraction. It can only be measured by your willingness to think, to question, and to care, even when the world seems determined to forget how. Even now, in this age of restless spectacle, there remains a corner of the mind that cannot be fooled by the glittering surfaces. It is the part that yearns to look past the noise, to reach for something that does not vanish the moment you touch it. You might try to quiet it with distraction, to bury it beneath the comforts of shallow amusement, but it waits with the patience of something essential. Because beneath every impulse to escape, there is still the quiet insistence that life is not meant to be merely observed. It is meant to be understood. And so the choice returns to you again and again, as relentless as a tide. Will you surrender your attention to those who would shape it for profit? Or will you claim it as your own? Will you accept the seduction of simplicity? Or will you risk the discomfort of seeking what is real? To choose the latter is not to retreat from the world, but to finally meet it on terms that honor its complexity. It is to admit that the mind, like the heart, was never built to be satisfied by spectacle alone. There is no algorithm that can teach you how to live with depth, no viral post that can replace the slow work of learning what matters. It is a path you must walk deliberately, willing to be misunderstood, willing to feel out of step. But in that quiet divergence lies a peculiar kind of freedom, the freedom to decide for yourself what deserves your time, your wonder, your belief. The freedom to belong to something older than trends, something that cannot be measured in metrics or captured in 15-second clips. Perhaps this is the final, most subversive act in a culture that worships distraction. To remain awake, to keep asking the questions that have no easy answers, to protect the parts of yourself that do not perform well on a screen, and to remember that in a world forever trying to flatten you into a caricature, the most enduring form of resistance is simply to remain fully human.